Deep in the forgotten woods where sunlight filtered through ancient trees, Rebecca Wilson stood before a weathered cabin. Her three children huddled close, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and uncertainty. Olivia, her eldest at 16, maintained a protective stance beside her 8-year-old sister Sophia, who clutched a worn stuffed rabbit to her chest. 12-year-old Noah bounced on his heels, his natural energy undiminished despite their desperate circumstances. 2 weeks ago, Becca had been a respected office manager with a steady paycheck and a modest apartment. Today she was jobless, homeless, and out of options. The cabinet's windows clouded with decades of dust seemed to call to her like an answered prayer, the last remnant of a grandmother she barely remembered, and a possible salvation for her drowning family. Wind whispered through the trees, carrying the earthy scent of pine and rain-soaked wood. Sophia pressed closer to her mother's side. "Is this where we're going to live now?" Her small voice cracked on the final word. The stuffed rabbit's ear twisted anxiously between her fingers. Becca's throat tightened as she fought to keep her voice steady. "Just for a little while until I figure things out." The weight of 3 young lives pressed down on her shoulders, heavier than the backpack containing their remaining possessions. The cabin's wooden steps sagged beneath the small porch, the door hanging slightly askew on rusted hinges. But the roof appeared intact, and through the grimy windows, Becca could make out the shadowy outline of furniture. Something else caught her eye, the corner of what appeared to be an old trunk partially hidden beneath a tattered blanket. What secrets did this abandoned cabin hold? And could they possibly change the course of a family on the brink of collapse 2 weeks earlier? Becca had sat stunned in her office chair, the termination letter trembling in her hands. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, suddenly harsh and accusing after 12 years of faithful service. Corporate restructuring, the sterile phrase that had just shattered her family's security. Her supervisor stood before her desk, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above her head. "I'm sorry, Becca. The decision comes from headquarters." His voice dropped to a mumble. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance." Wow. Becca's hands tightened on the paper, crinkling its corporate letterhead. 12 years. Her voice emerged stronger than she felt. "I've given this company 12 years of my life. I've never once been late. I worked through pneumonia last winter. I deserve more than a 2-minute conversation." The supervisor's face flushed with discomfort. "It's not personal. 20% of the staff is being let go." "It feels pretty damn personal from where I'm sitting." Becca rose her chair, rolling backward and hitting the wall with a dull thud. Around the office, coworkers pretended not to watch, their eyes darting away when she looked up. How many of them had received the same letter? How many were silently counting their savings, calculating mortgage payments and grocery bills? That night, Becca stared at her apartment ceiling, mind racing while her children slept. The digital clock on her nightstand cast an eerie blue glow across the room. 2:37 a.m. The severance would barely cover rent. After putting Olivia through braces last year and covering Noah's asthma treatments, her savings account held less than $1,000. The job market for office managers had dried up in their small city, flooded with similar corporate casualties. A stack of rejected applications sat on her kitchen table, each one a door slammed in her face. The ceiling seemed to press lower with each passing minute, the weight of responsibility crushing her chest. In the next room, Noah coughed in his sleep, a reminder of the medications he needed. Olivia's college fund, what little there was of it, would have to be sacrificed. And Sophia, still believing in magic and happy endings. How could Becca explain that sometimes life didn't work out the way storybooks promised? Morning light streamed through the kitchen blinds, illuminating the scattered job listings and rejection emails Becca had printed out. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, and her third cup of coffee had grown cold beside her laptop. The sound of footsteps pulled her attention to the doorway where Olivia stood, watching her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, concern aging her young face. "We'll be okay, Mom," Olivia said, her 16-year-old shoulders carrying a maturity beyond her years. She squeezed Becca's hand before moving to the refrigerator, the gesture so maternal it made Becca's heart ache. This wasn't the childhood she'd wanted for her daughter, forced to grow up too quickly to shoulder adult worries before her time. Olivia began preparing breakfast for her siblings, the routine so practiced it seemed choreographed. Cereal for Noah, who needed to take his medication with food. Banana slices arranged in a smile on a plate for Sophia, a small gesture to preserve childhood in the midst of their crumbling world. The sight of her eldest daughter taking on this responsibility both wounded and strengthened Becca. They would survive this. They had to. Noah bounded into the kitchen, moments later, 12 years old, and buzzing with energy despite the family's circumstances. "Can I use cardboard from the recycling for my school project?" His hair stuck up in wild directions, evidence of another restless night. "Of course, honey," Becca forced a smile, wondering how much longer they could afford school supplies, or if the project would even be completed before they had to move. 8-year-old Sophia appeared last, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit, a gift from her father before he decided family life was too constraining. "Did you find a new job yet?" Her voice small, sensing the tension in the air. "Not yet, sweetie, but I will." The promise felt hollow, but Becca kept her voice steady. Children were barometers for parental fear, and she refused to let them absorb her terror. The days blurred together in a parade of rejection emails, unanswered phone calls, and dwindling bank account numbers. Becca applied for positions. She was overqualified for positions. She was underqualified for anything that might provide a paycheck. Each night she adjusted their budget, cutting out every non-essential expense, calculating how long they could survive on her meager savings. The answer grew more dire with each passing day. 2 weeks passed with no promising leads. On a Tuesday morning, the eviction notice appeared on their apartment door. The official letterhead in legal language, stark against the white paper. 3 days to vacate. The words swam before Becca's eyes as she stood in the hallway, grocery bags cutting into her arms, the milk she'd carefully budgeted for suddenly feeling like a frivolous expense. That evening, Becca sat her children down in the living room, their faces solemn as they sensed the gravity of the moment. "We have to leave our apartment," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I'm still looking for work, but we need to find somewhere else to stay for a while." Olivia's face remained composed, though her eyes reddened at the edges. Noah kicked at the carpet, processing the news in his own way. Sophia's lower lip trembled. "What about my bed and my books?" The question pierced Becca's heart. "We can only take what fits in the car, sweetie. The most important things." "You're the most important thing," Sophia whispered, curling against her mother's side. "You and Liv and Noah." The simple truth from her youngest child nearly broke Becca's composure. The next day became a blur of painful decisions. What to sell, what to store with the one friend who offered her garage, what to squeeze into their aging sedan. Furniture went first, a second-hand couch sold to a young couple for less than half what Becca had paid. Electronics followed except for Becca's laptop, essential for job searching, and the children's school tablets. Olivia silently packed one small bag, her face stoic, but eyes red-rimmed when she thought no one was looking. She carefully wrapped her science fair medals in a t-shirt and tucked away the acceptance letter from the summer science program she now wouldn't be able to attend. Noah approached the situation with forced bravado, treating it like an adventure rather than a crisis. "It's like camping but longer," he announced, stuffing socks into the corners of his backpack. But Becca caught him late that night sitting on the floor of his now empty room, running his fingers over the height marks penciled on the wall, evidence of years of growth in the only home he remembered. Sophia cried when they left her bed behind the pink canopy, now stripped of its fairy lights. Her small hands clutched at the stuffed rabbit, the one possession she refused to be separated from. "Where will we go?" she asked repeatedly, searching for reassurance Becca couldn't honestly provide. Their final night in the apartment, they slept on blankets on the living room floor, huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck, which in many ways they were. Becca remained awake long after the children's breathing had steadied into sleep, staring at the ceiling and fighting the crushing weight of failure. She had always been the responsible one, the planner, the provider. Now she had nothing to offer but uncertainty. Morning arrived with harsh clarity. They loaded the last of their possessions into the car, clothing, important documents, and precious mementos that couldn't be replaced. The car groaned under the weight, the suspension already questionable, before they'd added their lives to its burden. "Where will we go?" Olivia asked as they drove away from the apartment building, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Becca gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "My grandmother owned a little place in the countryside near Pine Haven." The information was thin and a memory from childhood more than a solid plan. "It's probably long gone, but the area has camping grounds. We can stay there while I figure things out." The suburban landscape gave way to rolling farmland, then thicker forests as they drove further from the city. Cell service bars dwindled on Becca's phone, another tenuous connection to security fading away. The children grew quiet, even Noah's perpetual energy subdued by the weight of their journey. 3 hours into their drive, the car began sputtering on the rural highway. Warning lights flashed on the dashboard like accusatory eyes. "No, no, no," Becca muttered, easing off the accelerator. "Not now, please, not now." She managed to pull onto a dirt road before the engine died completely, the final insult in their cascade of misfortune. Steam hissed from under the hood when Becca popped it open, the acrid smell confirming what she already knew. This was beyond her limited mechanical knowledge, and the nearest town was still miles away according to the map. No cell service meant no calling for help. The afternoon sun beat down, indifferent to their crisis. "Mom, there's a path over there." Noah pointed to a narrow trail disappearing into the woods, his natural curiosity temporarily overriding their predicament. "Maybe it leads to a house where we can call for help," Olivia suggested, already shifting into problem-solving mode. With no better options, Becca nodded. "Stay together." Sophia held Noah's hand. She locked the car, though there was little risk of theft this far from civilization, and shouldered her backpack containing their essential documents and remaining cash, less than $300, to rebuild their lives. The path wound through dense trees, dappled sunlight creating shifting patterns on the ground. Birdsong and the occasional rustle of small animals provided an incongruously peaceful backdrop to their desperate situation. Sophia's small hand clutched Noah's, her other arm wrapped around her rabbit. Olivia walked slightly ahead, shoulders squared with determination, occasionally looking back to check on her mother. Nearly a mile into their trek, the path opened into a small clearing. There, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, stood a cabin. Its windows were clouded with grime wooden steps sagging beneath a small porch. The roof appeared intact, though vines had claimed one wall, nature slowly reclaiming the structure. Becca's breath caught in her throat. Could this possibly be her grandmother's place? The coincidence seemed too great, yet the timing too perfect to be mere chance. "Mom, we can't just break in," Olivia whispered as Becca tested the door handle. The metal was cool under her touch, years of rain and sun having weathered it to a dull patina. "We're not breaking in. We're seeking shelter in an emergency." Becca responded, the door swinging open with a haunting creak that suggested no one had crossed its threshold in years. "We'll find the owner tomorrow and explain." Inside, dust motes danced in beams of light filtering through dirty windows. A stone fireplace dominated one wall opposite a small kitchen area with an ancient wood stove. A wooden table with 3 chairs stood in the center, while a narrow staircase led to what Becca assumed was a loft area. The furniture was draped with yellowed sheets, ghostly sentinels preserving whatever lay beneath from the passage of time. "It's like a fairy tale house," Sophia whispered, her earlier tears forgotten in the face of this new adventure. "It's probably full of spiders," Noah countered, eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. The boy who had cried silently over height marks on a wall now bounced on his toes, ready to explore. Becca ran a finger along the dusty mantel, revealing darker wood beneath the grime. It hasn't been lived in for years, but the structure seemed sound. A surge of unexpected hope fluttered in her chest. They had shelter, at least for tonight. Tomorrow's problems would have to wait for tomorrow. They spent the remaining daylight clearing cobwebs and sweeping decades of dust from the wooden floor. Becca found that old blankets in a cedar chest that, once shaken vigorously outside, would serve as bedding. The pump behind the cabin yielded cold, clear water after some persistent effort solving their most immediate need. As night fell, the family huddled together on the floor before the fireplace, using jackets as pillows. The children fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's events. Becca remained awake, watching shadows dance across their faces by the light of her single candle. She'd kept her fears at bay for their sake, but alone with her thoughts, the gravity of their situation pressed down. Jobless, homeless, 3 children depending on her, and now stranded in a cabin that likely belonged to someone who would demand their departure once discovered. The flickering light caught something in the corner of the room, the edge of what appeared to be an old trunk partially hidden beneath a tattered blanket. Too tired to investigate further, Becca made a mental note to check it in the morning. For now, she allowed herself one quiet moment of tears before extinguishing the candle and joining her children in uneasy sleep, the unknown future waiting just beyond the cabin walls. Morning light streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in golden shafts. Becca woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings before yesterday's events flooded back. Her children still slept huddled together on the wooden floor, Sophia's arm thrown protectively around her rabbit Noah's mouth, slightly open in deep slumber. Olivia's brow furrowed even in sleep. The trunk in the corner beckoned. Becca carefully extricated herself from Sophia's grasp and crossed the room, kneeling beside the mysterious container. It was old but well-crafted leather straps reinforcing the corners, a brass lock securing its contents. She tried the lid locked as expected. A pang of guilt struck her. This wasn't hers to open yet. The mystery tugged at her curiosity. "What do you think is inside?" Noah's voice startled her. He stood behind her, hair tousled from sleep, eyes bright with the promise of discovery. "I don't know, but it's not ours to open." Becca stood brushing dust from her knees. "Maybe there's a key somewhere," he suggested, already scanning the room for hiding places. Becca ruffled his hair, grateful for his resilience. "Let's focus on making this place habitable first. We need food, and I need to figure out what to do about the car." As Olivia and Sophia woke, the family established their priorities, finding water, food, and assessing their temporary shelter. To Becca's relief, a hand pump well stood behind the cabin, still functional after some priming. The water ran clear and cold after the initial rusty flow, one problem temporarily solved. Inside, they continued cleaning. Olivia tackled the small kitchen area, wiping down surfaces and organizing the few utensils that remained. Noah explored the loft space, reporting back about 2 small bedrooms with bare mattresses. Sophia stayed close to Becca, helping sweep decades of dust from the floors with a broom found in a corner cupboard. "Mom, look!" Sophia pointed to something glinting in the debris near the fireplace. Becca knelt beside her daughter, brushing away ash and dust, to reveal a small brass key tarnished with age but intact. Noah's suggestion about finding a key echoed in her mind as she held it up to the light. Could it possibly? The key felt heavy in Becca's palm, its ornate design suggesting it belonged to something significant, perhaps the trunk that had captured her attention earlier. Olivia and Noah joined them, forming a circle around this small discovery. "Do you think it goes to the trunk?" Noah's voice trembled with excitement. "Only one way to find out," Becca replied, moving toward the corner where the trunk waited. The children followed, a sense of shared adventure momentarily eclipsing their desperate circumstances. Kneeling before the trunk, Becca wiped away decades of dust, revealing intricate carvings in the wooden lid, flowering vines encircling what appeared to be initials KC. The brass lock was green with verdigris, but the keyhole remained clear. With a deep breath, Becca inserted the key, feeling resistance before it turned with a satisfying click. The sound echoed in the quiet cabin, marking a threshold between past and present. The hinges protested as Becca lifted the lid, releasing the scent of cedar and old paper. Inside lay a treasure trove of history journals bound in faded leather, bundles of letters, tied with ribbon, black and white photographs in cardboard frames, and documents sealed with wax. On top rested a journal with a date inscribed on its cover, 1957. "Who's Catherine Collins?" Olivia asked, pointing to a signature on the first page of the open journal. Becca shook her head. "I don't know." She carefully lifted the journal, feeling the weight of someone else's life in her hands. The pages were filled with neat, flowing handwriting, the ink faded to sepia but still legible. The first entry captured Becca's attention immediately, April 17th, 1957. "I have finally escaped the confines of Boston society to claim my inheritance, this cabin, and the surrounding woods that once belonged to my great-aunt. Mother is scandalized, of course. A woman living alone in the wilderness is simply not done. But after losing Robert in the war, conventional expectations mean nothing to me. Here I will pursue my research in peace, documenting the native flora that has been woefully neglected by male botanists, too busy naming plants after themselves to properly study their properties." Becca read portions aloud to her children, all of them drawn into the life of a woman who had defied convention to live on her own terms. The journal entries continued detailing Catherine's botanical discoveries, her interactions with the local community, and increasingly her concerns about a local businessman named Edward Sterling, who seemed determined to acquire her land. June 3rd, 1957. "Sterling appeared at my door today, all false charm and condescension. He offered to relieve me of the burden of this property, as if my research and independence were mere whims to be discarded at the first masculine offer of rescue. When I refused, his demeanor changed instantly. These woods are no place for a woman alone, he said, no longer bothering to hide the threat beneath his words. I informed him that these woods have been more welcoming than any drawing room in Boston. He left, but I suspect this is not the end of his interest in my land. Noah's stomach growled, breaking the spell of Catherine's words and reminding Becca of their immediate needs. We need food, she said reluctantly, closing the journal. I'll walk to town if there is one nearby. I'm coming with you, Olivia stated, her tone allowing no argument. Becca nodded, turning to her younger children. Noah, you're in charge here. Keep the door locked and don't open it for anyone except us. She handed him her watch. We'll be back in 3 hours at most. If we're not, take Sophia and follow the path back to the car. Noah's face sobered at the responsibility, but he nodded, shoulders squaring. I'll protect Sophia and the cabin. Becca and Olivia set out following what appeared to be an old logging road leading away from the cabin. After a mile of walking, the trees thinned and they spotted rooftops in the distance. Pinehaven revealed itself as a small town that time seemed to have partially forgotten storefronts with painted signs rather than neon a town square, with a gazebo and streets named after trees rather than numbers. The general store occupied a corner of the main street, its windows displaying a mix of modern necessities and old-fashioned goods. A bell jingled as they entered, drawing the attention of an elderly woman behind the counter. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat bun, and she wore a cardigan despite the summer heat. Sharp eyes assessed them from behind wire-rimmed glasses. You're not from around here, she stated, the observation neither friendly nor hostile, simply factual. We're just passing through, Becca replied, conscious of her rumpled clothing and the vulnerability of her situation. Our car broke down and we needed some supplies. The woman's gaze softened slightly. Car trouble's common on these roads. Nearest mechanics in Miller's Crossing, 20 miles east. I'm Ruth Davis. She extended a weathered hand across the counter. Owned this store for 45 years after my adoptive mother passed. Becca Wilson. This is my daughter Olivia. Becca shook the offered hand, noting the strength in Ruth's grip despite her age. We're staying at a cabin in the woods while we figure out our next steps. Ruth's expression sharpened. A cabin in the woods, whereabouts? Becca hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to a stranger. About 2 miles west, near a clearing with a hand pump well. The older woman's face paled slightly. That would be Catherine Collins's place. Been empty for decades. Her eyes narrowed. How'd you get in? The door was unlocked. Becca lied, unwilling to admit to entering without permission. We needed shelter. I have 2 younger children. Ruth studied her for a long moment, seeming to weigh some internal decision. Catherine was my adoptive mother, she finally said. Took me in when I was 16 after my parents died in a fire. That cabin was her life's work, her laboratory, her sanctuary. A shadow passed over her face. I haven't been back since she disappeared. Disappeared, Olivia echoed, speaking for the first time. Ruth nodded, her eyes distant with memory. 30 years ago now. She went out to collect samples one morning and never returned. Search parties found nothing. Most folks assumed she'd fallen into the river during the spring floods. Her attention refocused on Becca with unsettling intensity. What else have you found in that cabin besides shelter? The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Becca thought of the trunk, the journals, the glimpse into Catherine's life and struggles. Some old furniture, a few books. Another lie, but self-preservation demanded caution until she understood what they had stumbled into. Ruth's expression suggested she didn't believe this answer, but she didn't press further. Instead, she reached beneath the counter and produced a ledger. You'll need supplies. I'm guessing cash is tight if you're stranded. Becca flushed. We can pay for what we need. Her remaining $270 would have to stretch until she found work. I'm not suggesting charity, Ruth said sharply. I'm offering credit. You write down what you take, you pay when you can. She pushed the ledger toward Becca. Catherine would have done the same for a family in need. The unexpected kindness threatened to crack Becca's carefully maintained composure. Thank you. She managed the words inadequate for the relief this simple gesture provided. They selected necessities with careful consideration. Rice beans, canned vegetables, matches of flashlight, batteries, and a basic first aid kit. Ruth added a loaf of homemade bread and a jar of local honey without recording it in the ledger. The honey's medicinal, she said when Becca tried to protest. Good for the boy's asthma. Becca's surprise must have shown on her face because Ruth smiled slightly. Small town. Word travels about newcomers, especially when one of them is wearing a medical alert bracelet. She nodded toward Noah's bracelet on Becca's wrist, which she wore while he slept for safekeeping. As Ruth packed their supplies into paper bags, she fixed Becca with a penetrating stare. That cabin holds secrets, Mrs. Wilson. Some might be worth uncovering. Others, she hesitated. The Sterling family still holds power in this county. They've wanted Catherine's land for generations. If you found something they wouldn't want discovered, be careful who you tell. The warning sent a chill down Becca's spine. Sterling, there was a man named Edward. Sterling mentioned in... She caught herself too late. Ruth's eyebrows rose. So you did find her journals? Caught in her lie, Becca nodded reluctantly. This morning, we found a trunk with journals and documents. William Sterling runs things now, Edward's son, just as determined to get that land, but smoother about it. Sits on the town council, owns half the businesses around here. Ruth leaned forward, lowering her voice. If you're reading those journals, you'll understand why Catherine protected that land with her life, and why the Sterlings have never stopped trying to take it. The bell above the door jingled, cutting their conversation short. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit entered, his cologne reaching them before he did. His salt and pepper hair was expertly cut, his smile practiced and political. Ruth, you're looking well, he said, then noticed Becca and Olivia. His smile remained fixed, but his eyes sharpened with interest. New faces in Pine Haven. Welcome. Ruth's demeanor cooled visibly. William, your suits get more expensive every year. He laughed as though this were a compliment rather than the criticism it clearly was. The benefits of progress, my dear. His attention returned to Becca. William Sterling, I serve on the town council among other investments. The name sent a jolt through Becca. Catherine's warnings in the journal suddenly personified before her. Becca Wilson, we're just passing through. Car trouble, I heard. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Where are you staying while you're stranded in our little corner of nowhere? Before Becca could formulate a vague response, Ruth cut in. I've set them up at the old Murphy place. The lie flowed smoothly from the older woman. Doing me a favor, really. Place needs airing out. Sterling's expression flickered with something unreadable before his smile reset. The Murphy place, of course. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to Becca. If you need anything during your stay, don't hesitate to call. Pine Haven takes care of visitors. The card was heavy stock, embossed with Sterling Developments and a phone number. Becca slipped it into her pocket with a non-committal thank you. After a few more minutes of superficial pleasantries with Ruth, Sterling departed, the bell announcing his exit as it had his arrival. The air in the store seemed to lighten with his absence. Don't tell anyone where you're really staying, Ruth said once the door closed. Especially not Sterling. He's had surveyors in those woods for years trying to find legal grounds to claim Catherine's property. If he knew you were in that cabin reading those journals... She shook her head. Just be careful. With their supplies packed and Ruth's warning weighing heavily on her mind, Becca prepared to leave. As they reached the door, Ruth called after them. Come back tomorrow. I have something that might help you understand what you found. The walk back to the cabin felt longer, their bags heavier than just their physical contents. Olivia remained quiet, processing the encounter with Sterling and Ruth's warnings. The forest seemed different now, every rustling branch potentially harboring watchful eyes. Noah greeted them at the door with relief. You were gone forever, he exaggerated, helping unload the groceries onto the wooden table. Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor, Catherine's journal open in her lap, far too advanced for her reading level, but captivating nonetheless. I found more journals, she announced proudly, and pictures of plants with notes. The lady who lived here was a plant scientist. A botanist, Olivia corrected, setting down cans of soup. And we met someone in town who knew her, Ruth Davis. She said Catherine was her adoptive mother. As they prepared a simple meal of soup warmed over the wood stove Becca had managed to light, she shared a sanitized version of their encounter with Ruth and Sterling. Noah's eyes widened at the mention of secrets and warnings, his imagination clearly racing with possibilities. Olivia remained thoughtful, connecting pieces of information with the analytical mind that had won her science fair medals. After dinner with the children settled into exploring different corners of the cabin, Becca returned to Catherine's journals. She selected one from 1960, 3 years after the first entry, and began to read. March 15th, 1960. The sterling situation grows more concerning. After 3 years of offers and thinly veiled threats, Edward has changed tactics. Today I discovered survey stakes deep on my property well beyond the boundary line. When confronted, his men claimed it was a mistake, but their smirks told a different story. I've documented the true boundary with photographs and have hidden copies of the original deed where Sterling will never find them. My research on the watershed is too important to fall into the hands of a man who sees forest and thinks only of timber profits. The entry confirmed Ruth's warnings about the Sterling family's interest in the property. Becca flipped forward several months. August 24th, 1960. My water samples confirm what I've suspected. There is an underground aquifer beneath this portion of the forest, one of remarkable purity. The unique combination of mineral content explains the unusual fertility of this area and the rare plant variations I've documented. I've expanded my research to track the aquifer's boundaries. Preliminary findings suggest it extends beneath portions of the Sterling timber tract, which explains Edward's sudden interest in my worthless forest land. Water will be more valuable than gold in the coming decades, and Edward Sterling knows it. Becca's attention was pulled from the journal by a shout from Noah. "Mom, come quick!" His voice echoed from the loft, tinged with excitement rather than fear. She hurried up the narrow stairs to find Noah and Sophia in the smaller of the two bedrooms. Noah pointed to a section of the wooden floor where he'd apparently been conducting his own exploration. I dropped my marble and it made a funny sound, hollow, not solid like the rest of the floor. Becca knelt beside him, examining the floorboards. One appeared slightly different from the others, the grain pattern interrupted. She pressed experimentally, feeling a slight give beneath her fingertips. There might be a compartment under here. With Noah's help, she managed to pry up the loose board, revealing a small space beneath. Inside lay a metal box, its surface dull with age. No lock secured it, just a simple latch. Becca's heart raced as she lifted it from its hiding place, feeling the weight of more secrets in her hands. The lid opened with a soft creak. Inside rested a bundle of papers tied with faded blue ribbon, a small leather pouch, and an envelope addressed simply to Ruth. Becca carefully unwrapped the ribbon, spreading the papers on the floor. Land deeds, property surveys, and water rights documentation, all bearing Catherine Collins' name, all dated 1962. "What are water rights?" Sophia asked, peering over her mother's shoulder. "They're legal documents saying who owns the water on or under a piece of land," Becca explained, scanning the technical language. According to these, Catherine owned the rights to all water sources on her property, including underground sources. The leather pouch yielded a heavy brass key, larger than the one that had opened the trunk, and a small notebook filled with coordinates and measurements. The envelope remained sealed, Catherine's flowing script designating it for Ruth alone. Becca set it aside, respecting this boundary despite her curiosity. Noah bounced on his heels. "So we found a secret compartment with secret documents about secret water. This is like a real treasure hunt." His enthusiasm brought a smile to Becca's face despite the growing unease in her stomach. They had stumbled into something significant, a decades-old conflict over land and resources that had apparently never been resolved. Catherine's warnings about the Sterling family echoed in Becca's mind, now reinforced by Ruth's caution and the documentation in her hands. The sound of tires on gravel filtered through the open window, a vehicle approaching on the seldom-used road to the cabin. Becca's pulse quickened. "Quick, put everything back in the box." She helped the children gather the papers, securing them in the metal container and replacing it in its hiding spot. The floorboards settled back into place just as car doors slammed outside. Heavy footsteps crossed the porch, followed by a sharp knock that echoed through the cabin. Becca pressed a finger to her lips, motioning for the children to stay upstairs. She descended the stairs slowly, heart hammering against her ribs. Through the dirty window, she could make out the silhouette of William Sterling and two other men on the porch, their posture suggesting this was not a social call. Sterling knocked again, harder. "I know someone's in there," he called, his voice losing the polished veneer it had worn in the store. "This is private property, and you're trespassing." Olivia appeared at Becca's side, her face pale but determined. "What do we do?" The question hung between them as Sterling's shadow loomed larger against the door, the past and present colliding in a moment of decision that would alter their future in ways Becca couldn't yet imagine. The journals, the hidden documents, Ruth's warnings, and now Sterling himself, all pieces of a puzzle they had unwittingly stepped into. Whatever happened next, Becca knew with certainty that their brief respite in the forgotten cabin had just come to an end. Sterling's fist pounded the door again, wood vibrating with his impatience. Last chance to come out voluntarily before we contact the sheriff. Becca's mind raced through their limited options. Running wasn't feasible with 3 children and nowhere to go. Fighting would only escalate the situation. That left confrontation or negotiation. She straightened her shoulders, maternal instinct, transforming fear into resolve. "Stay behind me," she whispered to Olivia. "If anything happens, take your siblings and run to Ruth's store." Olivia nodded, face pale but determined, as Becca unlatched the door. The hinges creaked, an announcement of surrender as Sterling's imposing figure filled the frame. His tailored suit looked absurdly out of place against the cabin's rustic backdrop, like a hawk among sparrows. "Mrs. Wilson." His eyebrows lifted in theatrical surprise, though the calculating look in his eyes suggested otherwise. "Quite a coincidence finding you here instead of the Murphy place." 2 men flanked him, one young with a crew cut and a security company logo on his polo shirt, the other older, weathered, carrying a clipboard that suggested bureaucratic authority rather than physical threat. "Our car broke down. We needed shelter." Becca kept her voice steady, neither apologetic nor confrontational. The door was unlocked. Sterling's smile never reached his eyes. "A fortunate coincidence for you, perhaps, but this property isn't abandoned. It belongs to Sterling Developments." The older man cleared his throat, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses. "Actually, Mr. Sterling ownership remains legally contested. The Collins estate." "That matter is nearly resolved, Jenkins." Sterling's sharp tone cut through the man's correction. "The point remains, these people are trespassing." Noah appeared at the bottom of the stairs, defiance written across his face. "We found the key to get in. Finders keepers." "Noah upstairs, now!" Becca's tone left no room for argument, though pride flickered beneath her stern expression. Sterling's attention shifted to the boy, then back to Becca. "A key, you say? Interesting. May I ask where you found this key?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Becca sensed immediately that admitting they'd found anything in the cabin would be a mistake. "My grandmother once mentioned a family property near Pine Haven. I assumed this might be it. I was mistaken." "Clearly." Sterling stepped forward, forcing Becca to move aside or stand awkwardly close. He entered, uninvited eyes scanning the cabin's interior with proprietary interest. "You've made yourselves quite at home." The younger man remained on the porch while Jenkins followed Sterling inside, clipboard clutched to his chest like armor. Olivia edged closer to her mother, arm protectively extended toward Noah. "We've cleaned up a bit," Becca acknowledged. "We'd planned to leave a note for the owner." Sterling's gaze lingered on Catherine's journal, still open on the table. Becca's stomach tightened as he reached for it. "What have we here? Light reading for your camping trip." He lifted the journal, flipping pages with casual disregard for their age and fragility. "Catherine Collins and her famous theories. My father found them quite entertaining." "Please be careful with that." Olivia's voice surprised them all, quiet but firm. "It's a historical document." Sterling's eyebrows rose at the teenager's boldness. He set the journal down with deliberate slowness. "Indeed it is, young lady. History best left in the past." His attention returned to Becca. "You have until tomorrow noon to vacate the premises. Jenkins here will return with the proper authorities if necessary." Jenkins shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncomfortable with his role as enforcer. "Mr. Sterling, given their circumstances." "Noon tomorrow," Sterling repeated, cutting him off again. "I'm being more than generous. The structural integrity of this place hasn't been assessed in decades. It's a liability nightmare." His smile reappeared shark-like and predatory. "For your family's safety, of course." Becca recognized the veiled threat beneath his concern. She'd encountered enough corporate manipulators to recognize the tactic: create a problem, then position yourself as the reasonable solution. "We appreciate your concern. We'll be gone by noon." Sterling nodded, seemingly satisfied with her capitulation. "Jenkins will provide contact information for the local mechanic at my expense. Consider it Pine Haven hospitality." The unexpected offer triggered Becca's suspicion rather than gratitude. Sterling wanted them gone efficiently with minimal local interaction. The question was why? What could Catherine's journals possibly contain that warranted this level of concern after so many years? As if reading her thoughts, Sterling paused at the door. One small piece of advice, Mrs. Wilson. Small towns run on whispers and memories. Not all stories you might hear about the Collins property or my family hold water. Best not to repeat them and risk misunderstandings. The threat lay thinly veiled beneath his polished veneer. Becca held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated despite the hammering of her heart. We're just passing through, Mr. Sterling. Your family history doesn't concern us. Excellent. Then we understand each other. He nodded to Jenkins and departed, boots heavy on the porch steps. Jenkins lingered, handing Becca a business card. Valley Automotive. Ask for Jim. He's fair, won't price gouge you. His voice lowered. For what it's worth, Mrs. Wilson, there's more to this property situation than Mr. Sterling suggests. The legal status is complicated. Complicated how? Becca kept her voice equally low. Jenkins glanced toward the open door. Let's just say Catherine Collins left matters unresolved when she disappeared. No body, no death certificate for 7 years. By then, the trail of ownership had become tangled. He adjusted his glasses nervously. Sterling Developments has claimed adverse possession, but without clear title. Jenkins, Sterling's voice carried from outside. We have other matters to attend to. The man straightened, professional mask slipping back into place. Noon tomorrow, Mrs. Wilson. I'm sorry, it can't be otherwise. After they departed, engine noise fading into forest silence, Sophia crept down from her hiding place at the top of the stairs. Are the bad men gone? They weren't bad exactly. Becca gathered her youngest into her arms, trying to believe her own words. Just doing their job. He wanted the journal. Olivia's perception cut to the heart of the encounter. He recognized it immediately. And he knows we found a key. Noah added, excitement overriding caution. Do you think there's treasure hidden here? Is that why he wants us gone? Becca considered the possibilities, remembering Catherine's documentation of the water aquifer. Some treasures weren't gold or jewels, but resources far more fundamental. Maybe, but we promised to leave by tomorrow, and we need to honor that. We're just going to give up. Olivia's disappointment was palpable. After everything we found, Catherine was protecting something important. We're not giving up. Becca squeezed her daughter's shoulder. We're regrouping. Ruth Davis knows more than she's telling us, and we're meeting her tomorrow. Noah perched on the table edge, swinging his legs. So what's the plan? Because I vote we keep exploring tonight. There could be more hidden compartments. Despite the gravity of their situation, Becca smiled at her son's enthusiasm. First, we document everything we found so far. Olivia, can you photograph the journals with my phone? Noah, you and Sophia carefully check for any other loose floorboards. As the children set to their tasks with unexpected cheerfulness, their predicament temporarily transformed into adventure. Becca returned to Catherine's journals, searching for answers about Sterling's interest in the property. The entries from 1962 proved illuminating the handwriting, more hurried tension evident in the pressed pen strokes. May 14, 1962. Edward Sterling has crossed a line. His men removed my property markers again, shifting them 50 yards into my land. When confronted, they claimed the original survey was flawed. I contacted James at the county office, who confirmed my boundaries are correct according to the deed. This isn't simple greed anymore. It's systematic effort to erase my claim to this land. The water testing confirms what I suspected. The aquifer extends throughout the eastern portion of my property, the purest source in the county. Sterling knows this. His recent purchase of the old mill downstream makes his intentions clear. Control the water, control the region. Becca flipped forward several pages, finding an entry that made her blood run cold. June 3, 1962. Break-in at the cabin today while I was gathering specimens. Nothing valuable taken, but my research notes were disturbed, particularly those regarding the aquifer mapping. I've moved the most crucial documentation to the hidden compartment beneath the east bedroom floor. The county recorder has copies of my updated will and property documents as well. Should anything happen to me, Ruth must receive these papers. Sterling grows bolder with each passing month. Yesterday, he offered to buy just the eastern 5 acres. To simplify your life, Miss Collins. When I refused, he suggested a woman alone in these woods faced many dangers. I'm not easily frightened, but I've begun carrying father's revolver during my excursions. Some threats need not be spoken aloud to be understood. The parallels to their own situation, Sterling's forced politeness, the veiled threats, the focus on the journals, sent a chill through Becca. Catherine Collins had been protecting something valuable enough to risk her safety. Now, decades later, the same forces gathered around the abandoned cabin and its accidental occupants. Noah's excited voice broke through her thoughts. "Mom, we found something else." He stood in the kitchen doorway, Sophia beside him clutching a dusty mason jar. "There's a loose brick in the fireplace." This was hidden behind it. The jar contained a roll of yellowed paper secured with twine. Becca carefully extracted it, unrolling a hand-drawn map of the property with detailed annotations about underground water sources, springs, and what appeared to be cave entrances. X marks indicated testing sites with corresponding water purity percentages. The eastern portion of the property showed readings of 9.8% purity, remarkably high for natural water. "It's a treasure, ma'am," Noah breathed, eyes wide. "Amastu." "Not gold," Becca corrected, "but maybe something more valuable. Clean water. Look at these purity readings, they're extraordinary." Olivia examined the map over her shoulder. "Ruth said Sterling's had surveyors in these woods for years. If this aquifer is as pure as Catherine's tests show, it would be worth millions, especially with increasing water scarcity." The pieces began falling into place, Sterling's insistence on claiming the property, his concern about the journals, Catherine's disappearance. This wasn't about timber rights or development potential. It was about controlling a pristine water source in an era of increasing contamination and shortage. "We need to find Ruth," Becca decided. "Tonight, not tomorrow. She needs to see what we found." The walk to town took longer in the fading light, forest shadows stretching across the path like grasping fingers. They moved as quietly as possible, Becca constantly glancing over her shoulder, imagining Sterling's men patrolling the woods. The children sensed her tension, maintaining unusual silence, except for occasional whispers between Noah and Sophia. Pine Haven's main street lay quiet in the early evening, most businesses already closed. Light spilled from Ruth's store windows, a beacon of warmth against the gathering darkness. The closed sign hung on the door, but Becca knocked anyway, praying the older woman was still inside. Moments later, Ruth's face appeared at the window, suspicion transforming to recognition. She unlocked the door, ushering them inside with surprising urgency. "I was about to drive out to the cabin. Sterling's man Jenkins came by asking questions about you." "Sterling found us at the cabin," Becca explained as Ruth locked the door behind them. "Gave us until noon tomorrow to leave." Ruth's expression hardened. That didn't take long. Someone in town must have talked. She led them through the store to a back room furnished with a desk, filing cabinets, and a worn sofa. "Sit. You look like you've seen ghosts." The children settled onto the sofa while Becca remained standing, tension preventing relaxation. "We found Catherine's journals and more hidden documentation about water rights, property boundaries, and this." She carefully unrolled the map on Ruth's desk. Catherine was documenting an underground aquifer of exceptional purity. Ruth's weathered hands trembled as she examined the map. "I knew about her water research. She talked about it constantly those last years. But this level of detail..." She looked up, eyes suddenly sharp. "You found her hidden compartment under the east bedroom floor." "Noah discovered it," Becca acknowledged. "There was a metal box with documents, including an envelope addressed to you." Ruth's breath caught. "After 30 years, her voice thickened with emotion. "The police searched that cabin top to bottom when she vanished. Either they missed it or they were instructed to miss it." Becca finished the unspoken thought. "The envelope is still at the cabin. We didn't open it. We need to retrieve it, tonight." Ruth moved with sudden determination to a filing cabinet, extracting a thick folder. "I've kept records of every legal maneuver Sterling has attempted to claim that property. Tax liens, adverse possession claims, even trying to have Catherine declared dead before the statutory 7 years." She spread documents across the desk, court filings, newspaper clippings, correspondence with attorneys, decades of persistent effort to acquire one small parcel of forest land. Edward Sterling began this campaign, and his son William continued it with even greater resources. There has to be more than just water, at stake, valuable as that is. A newspaper clipping from 1992 caught Becca's eye. Sterling announces plans for bottling facility pending resolution of water rights. The article detailed William Sterling's proposal for a high-end bottled water company using pristine Appalachian aquifer sources. The project had apparently stalled over ongoing property acquisition challenges. He's been planning this for decades, Becca realized, just waiting for the legal obstacles to clear. Ruth nodded grimly. And I've been the primary obstacle. As Catherine's only known heir, I've contested every claim. But without her will or death certificate, the legal grounds are shaky at best. The envelope might contain her will, Olivia suggested. That would strengthen your position. We need to get back to the cabin before Sterling decides to accelerate his timeline. Becca glanced at her watch, calculating. It's nearly 9 if we... The store's front door rattled, followed by insistent knocking. Ruth motioned them to silence, moving cautiously to a window that offered view of the storefront. Her posture stiffened. Sterling's security man, the young one from the cabin, I presume? Becca nodded, heart sinking. How did he know we'd come here? Small town, few secrets. Ruth gathered the documents, quickly returning them to their folder. There's a back door through the storeroom. My car's parked behind the building. She pressed keys into Becca's hand. Blue Subaru, 20 years old but reliable. Go to the cabin, get whatever you need, then drive to Miller's Crossing. Find Michael Anderson. He's an attorney who's helped me fight Sterling before. What about you? Becca protested. Ruth's smile held grim determination. I'll keep our friend occupied while you slip out. Don't worry about me. I've been dealing with Sterling's longer than that boy's been alive. The knocking intensified. Ruth shooed them toward the storeroom, voice dropping to a whisper. Michael lives above the old pharmacy on Elm Street. Tell him I sent you about Catherine's documents. He'll understand. Becca hesitated, reluctant to leave the older woman to face Sterling's man alone. Ruth read her concern and squeezed her arm. Some treasures aren't measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives they touch and the futures they save. Catherine understood that. Now go protect her legacy and your children. The profound words struck Becca like physical force. She nodded, gathering her children and slipping into the dimly lit storeroom. Through the doorway, she heard Ruth moving toward the front of the store, voice pitched deliberately loud. Coming! Hold your horses! The storeroom smelled of coffee beans and cinnamon shelves stacked with inventory awaiting placement on the sales floor. Noah navigated the narrow passage between boxes with the confidence of an explorer discovering the exit before Becca could locate it. The door opened silently onto an alley behind the building. Ruth's Subaru sat exactly where promised, its faded blue paint nearly invisible in the darkness. Becca ushered the children inside, heart pounding as she inserted the key. The engine started with a reliable rumble, headlights illuminating brick walls and overflowing dumpsters. She reversed, carefully avoiding trash cans, then turned onto a side street that would bypass the store's front entrance. As they passed the cross street, Becca glimpsed Sterling's security man engaged in conversation with Ruth at the store's front door. The older woman's body language conveyed annoyed confusion, a convincing performance that might buy them precious minutes. Are we running away? Sophia asked from the back seat, voice small against the engine's hum. No, sweetie. We're protecting something important. Becca navigated the unfamiliar streets, headlights cutting through darknesses as they left the small town behind. Something a brave woman tried to protect a long time ago. The forest road seemed more threatening in darkness, shadows between trees concealing potential watchers. Becca drove slowly, hyper-aware of every sound, branches scratching the car roof, gravel crunching beneath tires, her children's breathing. Olivia sat tensely beside her while Noah and Sophia whispered in the back seat, their earlier excitement transformed to apprehension. The cabin appeared through the trees, dark and silent. No vehicles waited in the clearing, no light betrayed human presence. Becca parked behind the structure, using trees as shield against observation from the main road. We need to be quick and quiet. Grab only what's essential. Inside, everything remained as they'd left it. Journals open, blankets rumpled, the trunk's contents partially sorted. Becca headed directly for the east bedroom, locating the loose floorboard Noah had discovered earlier. The metal box remained undisturbed, the sealed envelope still bearing Ruth's name. She gathered it along with Catherine's journals and the water rights documentation. Noah appeared at the doorway, eyes wide. Someone's coming. I saw headlights through the trees. Panic fluttered in Becca's chest. Grab our backpacks, only essentials. She stuffed the documents into her bag, mentally calculating escape routes. The back door offered their best option, allowing access to Ruth's car without being seen from the front approach. Olivia herded Sophia down the stairs, both carrying their small bags. Becca followed with the precious documents, reaching the main floor as headlights swept across the front windows. The engine sound grew louder, then stopped a vehicle parking in the clearing. Back door, now, Becca whispered, guiding her children through the kitchen toward the rear exit. She paused, remembering the mason jar map still sitting on the table. Doubling back, she snatched it just as footsteps sounded on the front porch. The knock, when it came, held none of Sterling's earlier politeness, just raw, demanding force against weathered wood. "Mrs. Wilson, we know you're in there. Mr. Sterling wants to continue your conversation." Becca froze, recognizing the security guard's voice. Had Ruth been unable to delay him, or had Sterling deployed multiple men to ensure they couldn't evade him? Either possibility suggested resources and determination beyond simple property disputes. Sophia clutched her mother's hand, eyes wide with fear. Noah stood protective beside his sister, shoulders squared despite his trembling hands. Olivia looked to Becca for direction, mature enough to recognize the danger, but young enough to need guidance. No good options presented themselves. Running meant exposing her children to pursuit in a dark forest. Hiding inside was temporary at best. Confrontation risked escalation. The weight of 3 lives, depending on her decision, pressed down on Becca's shoulders, was heavier than any corporate responsibility she'd ever shouldered. "Mrs. Wilson, final warning. Open the door or we'll be forced to enter." The decision crystallized in that moment of pressure. "When I engage them, take your siblings out the back door," Becca whispered to Olivia. "Get to the car and lock the doors. If I'm not there in 5 minutes, drive to Miller's Crossing and find Michael Anderson." "Mom, no." Olivia's protest died as Becca pressed Ruth's car keys into her palm. "I'll be right behind you." The promise felt hollow, but Becca infused it with all the confidence she could muster. "Go now while they're focused on the front." Becca approached the doors as her children slipped toward the back of the cabin, each footstep feeling like betrayal despite the necessity. She took a steadying breath, summoning the professional composure that had carried her through corporate crises and difficult clients. The door opened under her hand, revealing not just the security guard, but William Sterling himself, flanked by the sheriff, whose badge gleamed in the porch light. "Mrs. Wilson." Sterling's smile held no warmth. "Leaving so soon? After all the trouble you've gone to investigating local history, as you instructed, by noon tomorrow." Becca matched his coldness with her own, positioning herself to block view of the cabin's interior. Behind her, she heard the faint click of the back door, her children making their escape. Relief mingled with terror. They were safer away from this confrontation, but also beyond her protection in the dark forest. Sterling stepped forward, forcing her to choose between backing up or standing awkwardly close. "I'm afraid circumstances have changed. Ruth Davis informs me you've taken possession of private documents belonging to my family." The lie flowed smoothly from his practiced weapon. Becca maintained her composure, though internally she reeled at his audacity. "That's not true. The journals belong to Catherine Collins." "A disputed claim at best." Sterling gestured to the sheriff, a heavy-set man with a permanently furrowed brow. "Sheriff Gaines has authorized a search for stolen property. You need a warrant for that." The words emerged, automatically remembered from police procedurals and legal dramas. Sheriff Gaines finally spoke, his drawl deliberate and condescending. "Not when we have credible report of stolen documents, ma'am. Exigent circumstances apply." The legal smokescreen smelled of corruption, a sheriff doing a wealthy man's bidding rather than upholding the law. Becca stood her ground, calculating how long she needed to delay them. "I've taken nothing that wasn't already in this cabin. If Catherine Collins left journals documenting her research, they belong to her estate, not Sterling Developments." Sterling's facade cracked slightly, frustration bleeding through his polished veneer. "Those journals contain proprietary information about water resources illegally obtained from Sterling property. They were never hers to document." "Water doesn't follow property lines," Becca countered the phrase rising unbidden from Catherine's journals. "And neither should our responsibility to protect it." Something flickered in Sterling's eyes, recognition, perhaps, that she'd read more than he'd assumed. His voice hardened. "Step aside, Mrs. Wilson. Don't make this more difficult than necessary. Where are your children? The sheriff's question carried accusation. Seems strange them being so quiet. Cold fear washed through Becca. Had they made it to the car? Had the engine sound alerted Sterling's men? She forced casual dismissal into her voice. They're sleeping upstairs. It's been a long day. Sterling's eyes narrowed, disbelief evident. Check the cabin, he ordered the security guard who brushed past Becca with unnecessary force. She stumbled backward, regaining balance against the table edge. This is a legal entry. I haven't given permission for anyone to search this property. The property doesn't belong to you, Sterling reminded her, following his man inside. Jenkins filed a formal trespassing complaint this afternoon. Legally, you have no standing here. The security guard returned moments later, face tight with barely suppressed anger. They're gone. Back door's open. He directed his report to Sterling, ignoring both Becca and the sheriff. Car tracks behind the cabin. Sterling's expression darkened. Find them. They can't have gone far. He turned to Becca, previous pretense abandoned. Where are they going? What will Ruth tell you? Nothing that concerns you. Becca straightened, drawing dignity around herself like armor. My children are safe from whatever game you're playing. That's all that matters. The security guard departed at Sterling's nod screen door, slamming behind him. Engine noise followed seconds later, pursuit underway. Becca's confidence wavered. Olivia was responsible but still a teenager with minimal driving experience navigating unfamiliar roads in darkness. This isn't a game, Mrs. Wilson. Sterling's voice dropped lower, intended only for her ears despite the sheriff's presence. This is business, valuable business. Your interference threatens to disrupt. Those journals and whatever else you've found need to disappear, just like Catherine Collins did 30 years ago. The implication hung between them, unmistakable in its menace. Becca's blood chilled at the casual reference to Catherine's disappearance, not as mystery, but as precedent. Are you threatening me? Merely stating historical fact. Sterling's smile returned politician smooth. People who insert themselves into matters beyond their understanding often find themselves facing unintended consequences. Sheriff Gaines cleared his throat, discomfort evident despite his earlier compliance. Mr. Sterling, if they've got Ruth Davis's car, we should alert the roadblocks. County line's only 15 minutes out. Roadblocks. They'd mobilize police resources this quickly, suggesting influence far beyond a simple property dispute. Becca's alarm intensified. How could Olivia possibly navigate such obstacles? An excellent suggestion, Sheriff. Sterling maintained eye contact with Becca. We wouldn't want Mrs. Wilson's children getting lost in these woods after dark. All sorts of dangers out there, cliffs, abandoned mine shafts, not to mention disorientation. Children have wandered for days before being found. Each word twisted the knife of parental fear. Becca struggled to maintain her composure, knowing reaction would only confirm her children's flight. You're describing criminal action, Mr. Sterling. Witnesses have seen us together. Ruth Davis knows. Ruth Davis is an elderly woman with declining faculties who harbors irrational grudges against my family. Sterling cut her off smoothly. Her claims would hardly constitute credible testimony. The sheriff shifted his weight, growing visibly uncomfortable with the conversation's direction. I should get those roadblocks organized. Of course. Sterling nodded dismissal, attention never leaving Becca. We'll continue our discussion about the missing documents. After the sheriff departed, leaving Becca alone with Sterling in the cabin, Catherine Collins had once called home. The air thickened with unspoken threat. Sterling moved to the table where Catherine's journals lay open, running his fingers across the faded handwriting with proprietary familiarity. She was brilliant, you know, ahead of her time in understanding water conservation and purity analysis. He glanced up, eyes calculating. My father recognized her value, offered her partnership. Her refusal was unfortunate for everyone involved. Partnership. Becca couldn't contain her disbelief. Catherine's journals described threats, boundary markers, move break-ins. Sterling's laugh held no humor. History written by the losing side always paints the victor as villain. Catherine Collins was an educated woman playing at science without understanding business realities. He closed the journal with deliberate care. The aquifer she so diligently mapped belongs to this region's future prosperity, properly managed by those with resources to maximize its potential. You mean monetize it? The pieces aligned in Becca's mind: Sterling's bottled water ambitions, the decades-long pursuit of Catherine's land, the urgency behind silencing her documentation. You're afraid her research proves the water source begins on her property, giving her estate primary rights that supersede your claims. Something flickered in Sterling's expression, surprise perhaps at her quick assembly of scattered facts. Simplified but essentially correct. Water rights in this county follow first-use doctrine. Catherine's documentation, if validated, would create legal obstacles to proper development. Proper development meaning exclusive Sterling control. Becca moved carefully around the table, maintaining distance while assessing possible exits, rather than the protected public resource Catherine intended. Public resources become tragedy without proper management. Sterling's tone shifted to lecture, rehearsed arguments deployed with practiced confidence. Private stewardship ensures sustainability through market incentives, while generating billions in profit from what nature provided freely. Becca recalled Catherine's passionate journal entries about water conservation. Some treasures aren't meant to be owned, but protected for generations yet unborn. The phrase, so similar to Catherine's writings, visibly startled Sterling. His composure cracked further. You've read more than I realized. Where are the other documents, the surveys, the water testing data? Outside vehicles approached headlights, sweeping the clearing as multiple cars arrived. Becca's fear intensified. Had they caught Olivia and the children? Or were these reinforcements for Sterling's urge, "It's over, Mrs. Wilson"? Sterling gestured toward the approaching lights. Cooperate now. Tell me where the children took the documents, and perhaps we can resolve this without involving them further. The thinly veiled threat against her children crystallized Becca's resolve. Whatever happened to her, Olivia, Noah, and Sophia needed to reach safety with Catherine's evidence intact. There's nothing to tell. We found old journals about plants and weather. Hardly seems worth this level of concern. Sterling's expression hardened, persistently uncooperative. He reached inside his jacket, withdrawing a cell phone. Perhaps speaking directly with your daughter might prove more productive. Cold dread washed through Becca. Had they already captured Olivia? The front door opened before she could respond, admitting not the sheriff or security guard, but a middle-aged man in rumpled clothing, his tie loosened and jacket wrinkled as though he had dressed hastily. That's enough, Sterling. The newcomer's voice carried authority despite his disheveled appearance. Sheriff Gaines called me, said things were getting out of hand. Sterling's expression shifted to controlled annoyance. Anderson, this doesn't concern you. Ruth Davis called me an hour ago. That makes it very much my concern. The man, Michael Anderson, Becca presumed, moved further into the room, positioning himself between Sterling and Becca. Organizing police roadblocks for children based on manufactured theft accusations, even for you, that's overreaching. Becca's relief at Anderson's arrival mingled with continued fear for her children. My children, have they been stopped? Anderson shook his head. No roadblocks materialized. Sheriff Gaines developed sudden concern about jurisdictional overreach, improper procedure. His gaze never left Sterling. Strange how legal concerns surface when calls are placed to the State Police Oversight Board. Sterling's mask of civility slipped further. You're interfering with a legitimate property protection action. These people are trespassing in possession of stolen documents. Documents that, if they exist, would belong to Catherine Collins' estate, represented by Ruth Davis, whom I represent. Anderson's interruption carried practiced precision. Any claims of ownership would require documentation Sterling Developments has conspicuously failed to produce in 30 years of litigation. The standoff crackled with tension, Sterling's wealth and local influence against Anderson's legal authority. Becca remained silent, calculating her options should the confrontation escalate further. Sterling recovered his composure with visible effort. You're overplaying a weak hand, Anderson. We both know Ruth's claim to the Collins estate rests on informal adoption, never legally formalized. Without Catherine's will, we have the will. Anderson's declaration landed like a thunderclap in the small cabin. Ruth received a phone call 30 minutes ago from her legal ward, one Olivia Wilson, who has successfully delivered sealed documentation addressed to Ruth Davis from Catherine Collins. Documentation that includes her properly witnessed and notarized last will and testament. Becca stared at Anderson, hope and confusion battling in her mind. Olivia had reached Ruth's contact. The children were safe. But how had Anderson arrived so quickly? Sterling's face drained of color. That's impossible. We searched. He caught himself, but the damning admission hung incomplete in the air. Search the cabin after Catherine's disappearance. Anderson finished, eyes narrowing. Interesting choice of words for someone with no official capacity in that investigation. Vehicles outside disgorged newcomers, not Sterling's security forces, but state police in official uniforms, their presence transforming the cabin's atmosphere from threatening to official. Sterling's days darted between them and Anderson calculation replacing confidence. This property dispute will be resolved in court as always. Sterling's retreat behind legal procedure sounded hollow after his earlier threats. If Davis has new documentation, proper channels exist for submission. Indeed they do. Anderson stepped aside as two officers entered. Officers, Mr. Sterling was just leaving. He entered this property without the permission of its current legal occupant. Current legal occupant. Sterling's disbelief pierced through his crumbling facade. Based on what claim? Based on Catherine Collins's written permission for any blood relatives to utilize this property in times of need. Anderson produced a folded document from his jacket pocket. A provision specifically included to protect family members from predatory interests like those attempting to seize her land through dubious legal maneuvers. Becca's confusion must have shown on her face because Anderson offered a small, reassuring nod. Ruth explained your grandmother's connection to Catherine. Second cousins, I believe. The fabrication was smooth clearly for Sterling's benefit. Becca decided to play along. Yes, though they lost touch decades ago. Grandmother mentioned the cabin once, which is why I thought to come here when we were stranded. Sterling's expression suggested he didn't believe this convenient relation, but the state police presence limited his options for challenge. This changes nothing long-term. The courts will still rule on rightful ownership. Of course, Anderson's agreement carried professional detachment. Through proper legal channels with all evidence properly considered, including Catherine's research documentation, water rights certificates, and boundary surveys. Each item Anderson listed deepened the pallor of Sterling's complexion. He recognized defeat temporary, at least in this skirmish. With a curt nod to the officers, he departed, footsteps heavy with suppressed rage. After Sterling's car disappeared down the forest road, Becca turned to Anderson, questions tumbling forth. My children, are they safe? How did you get here so quickly? What happens now? Anderson raised a calming hand. Your children arrived safely at my office 20 minutes ago. Ruth called ahead, so I was expecting them. I was already en route here when she called again about Sterling's escalation. Relief weakened Becca's knees. She sank onto a kitchen chair, the weight of fear finally lifting enough to recognize her exhaustion. Thank you. I didn't know what would happen when they left. Olivia handled herself admirably, Anderson assured her. Drove exactly as instructed, avoided main roads, and delivered Catherine's documentation intact. Smart girl. Pride briefly overwhelmed Becca's fatigue. She's always been the responsible one. Anderson sat across from her, his earlier authoritative demeanor softening. Ruth explained your situation, job loss, eviction car trouble. Terrible timing, but perhaps fortunate in other ways. He gestured around the cabin. Catherine's legacy has been contested for 30 years. Sterling nearly succeeded in burying her research permanently. Your family's arrival may have preserved the most important evidence we've had in decades. Sterling's reaction seemed extreme even for valuable water rights, Becca observed. Anderson nodded, his expression grave. Water rights are just the beginning. Catherine's research documented contamination from Sterling's manufacturing facilities, upstream pollution they have denied for decades. If her evidence proves they knowingly poisoned groundwater while simultaneously developing bottled water from the uncontaminated aquifer beneath her property, the liability would be enormous. Becca finished, understanding dawning. Class action lawsuits, criminal environmental charges. The end of Sterling Developments as a viable corporation, Anderson confirmed. William's father began this cover-up. William continued it, likely without fully understanding what he was hiding. The scale of the situation expanded in Becca's mind from simple property dispute to environmental crime spanning generations. Catherine Collins hadn't just been protecting water rights. She'd been gathering evidence of corporate malfeasance with potentially deadly consequences for the surrounding communities. What happens now? Becca asked again. The question weighted differently with her new understanding. Anderson glanced at his watch. Now I take you to my office where your children are waiting. Tomorrow we meet with Ruth to review Catherine's documentation properly. After that, he shrugged, legal battles certainly. Sterling won't surrender billions in assets without exhausting every option. And us, my family. The immediate danger might have passed, but Becca's fundamental problems remain jobless, homeless with 3 children depending on her. Anderson's smile carried unexpected warmth. Ruth mentioned offering you temporary lodging in her apartment above the store. As for longer term, Catherine's will apparently contains provisions for caretakers of her property and research. Given your family's role in preserving her legacy, you might find the opportunities here in Pinehaven. Hope flickered in Becca's chest, fragile but persistent, like the first spring shoots emerging after winter. I don't want charity. Not charity, earned position. Anderson stood gathering Catherine's journals with careful respect. The community Ruth and Catherine tried to build here, focused on conservation and sustainable water use, needs people who understand what's at stake. Becca rose, gathering her few belongings, mind racing with possibilities. From corporate cast-off to potential environmental whistleblower, in the span of a single day, life's trajectory, shifting on discoveries hidden in an abandoned cabin. Will Sterling retaliate? Anderson's expression sobered. Almost certainly, but with state authorities now involved and Catherine's documentation secured, his options are limited. Corporate sharks prey on isolated victims. Together we present a more formidable opposition. As they prepared to leave, Becca paused in the cabin doorway, looking back at the space that had briefly sheltered her family in their darkest moment. Catherine Collins had fought alone against corporate greed, documenting corruption at great personal risk. Her disappearance, likely no accident given Sterling's veiled comments, had silenced her voice, but preserved her evidence, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Sometimes what looks worthless to the world is worth everything to those who know where to look. Becca murmured, remembering words from Catherine's journal. Anderson nodded, understanding the reference. Catherine believed that about this land, about clean water, about truth itself. He gestured toward the waiting police car. Let's not keep your children waiting any longer. We have battles ahead, but tonight at least your family is safe. As they drove away from the cabin, moonlight silvered the surrounding forest, the same trees that had witnessed Catherine's struggle decades earlier, now standing sentinel over a new chapter in the same ongoing fight. Becca leaned back against the seat, exhaustion competing with determination. Sterling wielded wealth, influence, and generations of entrenched power. She had only truth, Catherine's evidence, and her children's future to defend. For tonight it was enough. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The reunion with her children in Michael Anderson's office released a flood of emotion Becca had suppressed throughout the confrontation with Sterling. Noah launched himself into her arms, his small body trembling with relief and lingering adrenaline. Sophia clung to her waist, face buried against her stomach, while Olivia maintained her composure for precisely 3 seconds before dissolving into tears. You came back, Olivia whispered, her teenage stoicism crumbling. I thought when they went after you, I'll always come back. Becca gathered all 3 children, close, their collective warmth driving away the chill of Sterling's threats. Always. Anderson's office occupied the 2nd floor of a Victorian building on Miller's Crossing, Main Street, its bay windows overlooking a town square, illuminated by wrought iron lamps. Law books lined oak shelves, their leather spines testifying to decades of legal practice. The space smelled of coffee paper and furniture polish, civilized scents that stood in stark contrast to the primal fear they'd escaped. Ruth Davis sat in a worn leather chair by the desk, Catherine's metal document box open before her. The sealed envelope lay in her weathered hands, still unopened, despite the answers it promised. Her eyes reflected both anticipation and reluctance, eager for Catherine's final words, yet hesitant to break the last tangible connection to her adoptive mother. You should read it privately, Becca suggested, sensing Ruth's conflict. We can wait downstairs. Ruth shook her head, her silver hair catching the lamplight. Catherine kept no secrets from those she trusted. After 30 years, her words deserve witnesses. She broke the seal with trembling fingers, extracting several pages of handwritten text. The handwriting matched the journal's flowing script from a different era, when penmanship conveyed character. The letter began simply, "My dearest Ruth, if you're reading this, I must assume I am gone. Hopefully through natural causes at advanced age, though I fear Edward Sterling may orchestrate a more expedient departure." Ruth's voice faltered, emotion thickening her tone as she read Catherine's prescient words. The letter continued with personal expressions of love and maternal pride before addressing the practical matters of inheritance. Catherine had indeed left Ruth everything: the cabin, the surrounding forest, and most importantly, her research documenting the Sterling Corporation's systematic contamination of local groundwater. The evidence is incomplete but damning. Sterling Industries has been dumping chemical byproducts from their textile processes into the watershed for 15 years. Meanwhile, they've secretly purchased land parcels tracking the path of the protected aquifer. I've mapped the only uncontaminated water source remaining in the county. Their plan, I believe, is to create artificial scarcity by poisoning public water sources while controlling the only viable alternative. My research proves not only the contamination source, but also their knowledge of it as early as 1952. Ruth paused, looking up at Anderson. This confirms everything we've suspected, but couldn't prove. Catherine had the evidence all along. Anderson nodded, expression grim. The statute of limitations on environmental crimes doesn't apply when concealment can be proven. This documentation could support criminal charges even decades later. Catherine's letter continued with specific instructions about hidden research samples, documentation buried in waterproof containers at marked sites throughout her property, and copies entrusted to colleagues at universities, precautions that had protected her evidence from Sterling's thorough search after her disappearance. The letter's final paragraph shifted focus, addressing whoever might be reading alongside Ruth. To those who have helped preserve this truth, know that you fight for more than one woman's legacy. Clean water is civilization's foundation, not a commodity to be controlled by those with the deepest pockets. The true value of an inheritance isn't in what you receive, but in what you choose to do with it. Ruth, my beloved daughter, in all ways that matter, I trust you to carry forward what I began not from obligation, but from shared belief in justice and stewardship. All my love until we meet again, Catherine. Silence fell after Ruth finished reading, the weight of responsibility settling over the room. Catherine's words, written 30 years earlier, had crossed time to provide direction exactly when needed. The coincidence seemed too perfect for mere chance, as if some greater design had brought Becca's family to the abandoned cabin precisely when Catherine's evidence needed rediscovery. What happens tomorrow? Noah's question broke the contemplative quiet, his 12-year-old mind focused on immediate concerns rather than historical significance. Anderson closed the document box, his legal mind already formulating strategy. Sterling will regroup overnight, likely consulting attorneys about damage control. By morning, we need to secure Catherine's hidden research samples before he can locate and destroy them. We should also file for emergency injunction preventing any development or alteration of the property. Ruth added, her business acumen showing through grief. And contact the EPA about potential Superfund implications if the contamination is as extensive as Catherine suggested. The adults continued discussing legal maneuvers while Becca observed her children. Olivia absorbing every detail with keen interest, Noah fighting exhaustion despite his determination to participate, Sophia already asleep against her mother's shoulder. The day's emotional toll had depleted them all. Anderson noticed Sophia's sleeping form and checked his watch. Nearly midnight. You need rest before tomorrow's challenges. I've arranged rooms at the inn across the square, nothing luxurious, but clean and secure. The Roosevelt Inn occupied a restored colonial building with wide plank floors and 4-poster beds. The innkeeper, clearly briefed by Anderson, asked no questions about their late arrival or lack of luggage, simply providing keys and directions to connecting rooms on the second floor. Becca settled her children with minimal fuss, their extraordinary day culminating in extraordinary exhaustion. After tucking Sophia beneath a handmade quilt and confirming Noah had his inhaler accessible, Becca found Olivia standing at the window staring into the darkness. At 16, her daughter stood at childhood's edge, one foot already stepping toward adulthood, especially after today's events. Olivia turned as Becca approached, moonlight silvering her profile. I was so scared driving through those woods. Her voice remained steady, but her fingers twisted the hem of her shirt, a nervous habit from early childhood. Every headlight felt like Sterling's men coming after us. You did perfectly, Becca assured her. Better than perfectly. You saved Catherine's evidence and your siblings. I just followed Ruth's directions. Olivia's modesty couldn't hide her pride. Noah was the real hero. He navigated using stars when we had to turn off headlights on the back roads. The image of her children supporting each other through genuine danger tightened Becca's throat. I'm sorry you had to face that. None of this should have fallen on your shoulders. Olivia's expression shifted, surprising Becca with its maturity. Maybe it should have. We discovered Catherine's research. That makes us responsible for what happens to it. She gestured toward the sleeping town. These people have been drinking contaminated water for decades because Sterling buried the evidence. If we walked away just because it's dangerous or inconvenient, we'd be no better than those who look the other way. Becca finished, recognizing her own ethical code reflected in her daughter's reasoning. Corporate America had taught her that moral compromises came disguised as practical necessities, reasonable accommodations, team player attitudes. She'd lost her job partly because she'd challenged such compromises. Morning arrived with golden light and renewed purpose. Becca woke to find Noah and Anderson bent over Catherine's property maps, identifying marked sample sites while Olivia organized the journals chronologically. Sophia sat cross-legged on the inn's braided rug, solemnly arranging Catherine's pressed flower specimens by color and type. The preservation is remarkable, Anderson noted, examining 60-year-old documentation. Catherine understood she was creating evidence for future legal proceedings. Everything is dated, witnessed, and meticulously organized. Ruth arrived with breakfast baskets and news from town. Sterling's men were at the cabin at dawn. State police intervened before they could remove anything, but they're claiming authorized property inspection. Anderson's expression tightened. Attempting to locate and destroy Catherine's hidden samples before we can retrieve them. We need to move quickly. The morning transformed into a carefully coordinated treasure hunt. Dividing into teams with state police escorts protection against Sterling's increasingly desperate interference, they followed Catherine's maps to hidden caches throughout the property. Each waterproof container yielded meticulously preserved water samples, soil analysis reports, and photographic evidence of contamination sources, all carefully dated and witnessed. Noah approached the expedition like a grand adventure, his earlier fear transformed to excitement as he navigated using Catherine's coordinates. Sophia developed an uncanny knack for spotting the subtle markers. Catherine had left a particular arrangement of stones, notches carved into tree trunks, wildflower patterns that seemed natural but followed human design. She's talking to me, Sophia confided to Becca after discovering a particularly well-hidden cache beneath a lightning-struck oak. Not with words, but I can feel where she wants us to look. Becca might have dismissed such fanciful thinking before this week. Now, after experiencing the seemingly orchestrated series of discoveries that had brought them to this moment, she simply squeezed her daughter's hand. Then we should listen carefully. By mid-afternoon, they had recovered 12 sample caches, each containing damning evidence of Sterling Industries' environmental crimes spanning 3 decades. Anderson coordinated with environmental officials, arranging secure transport and proper chain of custody documentation for eventual legal proceedings. Ruth supervised the cataloging process, her business precision ensuring nothing would be overlooked or mishandled. Catherine created a perfect case, scientific evidence supported by corporate documentation she somehow obtained. The question is why she never presented it herself. The final journal might explain, Olivia suggested, holding the last volume. They discovered its entries ending just days before Catherine's disappearance. She mentions meeting an insider source at Sterling Industries, someone providing internal documentation of corporate knowledge about the contamination. Becca felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. A whistleblower who might have been discovered. The implication hung an unspoken Catherine's disappearance, taking on more sinister dimensions with each revelation. As they processed the final cache, a police radio crackled with urgent communication. Their escort officer listened intently, then approached Anderson with grave expression. Sterling's filed emergency restraining orders against everyone involved. Judge Carlton granted them without hearing claims of trespassing evidence, tampering, and corporate espionage. Carlton, Anderson spat the name like a curse. Sterling's golf partner and primary investor in the bottled water venture. This stinks of judicial misconduct. Officers are being dispatched to enforce immediately. The officer continued, his discomfort evident. including seizing all materials removed from the property today. Ruth's face hardened with resolve. So Sterling still controls the local judiciary just as he did when Catherine disappeared. Some things never change. But some do, Anderson countered, already dialing his phone. We have state environmental officials involved now, and federal jurisdiction supersedes county orders when potential Superfund sites are concerned. He stepped away to make urgent calls, legal, counteroffensive, already forming. Becca gathered her children closer, instinctively protective, as the atmosphere tensed around them. The morning's progress, seemingly so definitive, now wavered under Sterling's institutional influence. The system still bent toward power and money despite their evidence. Anderson returned expression grim but determined. We have 30 minutes before county deputies arrive. State environmental officials are dispatching their own team, but they're an hour out. We need to move this evidence off-site immediately. The research station, Ruth suggested. Catherine's university colleague maintained facilities in the National Forest, outside county jurisdiction, 20 miles through back roads. Anderson weighed the option. Sterling will have people watching main roads. Noah tugged Becca's sleeve, eyes bright with inspiration. Catherine's map shows old logging roads. They're not on regular maps, but they connect to the state forest boundary. The boy spread Catherine's detailed property survey across the hood of Anderson's car, tracing faded lines that meandered through the densest sections of forest. See, they loop around Sterling's land entirely. If we take these trails, we could avoid their roadblocks. Anderson studied the route, professional caution warring with desperate necessity. These haven't been maintained in decades. They could be completely overgrown or washed out. They're not. Noah's confidence surprised them all. I explored them yesterday while you were cataloging samples. The main trail is rough but passable for high-clearance vehicles. Catherine marked them with blue blazes on trees. They're faded but still visible. Ruth's weathered hand clasped Noah's shoulder, pride evident in her expression. Catherine would have appreciated your thoroughness, young man. She never left details to chance either. Decision made, they quickly transferred the most crucial evidence to Anderson's SUV, water samples, corporate documents, and Catherine's original research notebooks. Ruth would drive with Anderson, navigating using Catherine's maps, while Becca and her children would follow in Ruth's Subaru with the remaining materials. If we get separated, continue to the research station. Anderson handed Becca a hand-drawn map. Ask for Dr. Eliza Washington. She worked with Catherine in the 60s and has security clearance for sensitive environmental research. As they prepared to depart, state police radio chatter indicated Sterling's escalation county roadblocks, establishing perimeters around all exits from the Collins property, additional deputies en route from neighboring counties, and most concerning, private security contractors deployed to protect Sterling corporate interests. He's dropping pretense entirely, Ruth observed, checking the secure containers one final time. No more legal maneuvering. He's using force to seize evidence before state authorities can intervene. Then we move now, Anderson decided. Stay close, maintain radio contact, and remember this evidence represents 30 years of Catherine's work and possibly her life. We cannot allow Sterling to bury it again. The caravan departed along Catherine's secret route, Anderson's SUV, leading with Ruth, navigating Becca, following carefully in the Subaru. The logging road, little more than parallel ruts cutting through dense forest, required constant attention to avoid rocks and washouts. Noah called directions from the passenger seat while Olivia monitored the radio Anderson had provided. Sophia sat silently in the back, clutching Catherine's flower collection to her chest like precious cargo. The journey proceeded without incident. For the first 7 miles, the forest growing denser and the trail narrower with each passing kilometer. Hope began to build that they might reach the research station without confrontation. That hope shattered when Anderson's vehicle suddenly stopped, brake lights flashing warning. Becca halted behind them, and idling as she watched Anderson exit his vehicle and approach a massive fallen oak blocking their path. The tree's position directly across the narrowest section of trail, where dense undergrowth prevented bypass, suggested deliberate placement rather than natural fall. Anderson spoke urgently into his radio. Roadblock ahead. Recent cut, not natural. Sterling's people must have studied the same maps. Ruth's voice crackled through Olivia's receiver. We need to turn back, find another route. Before Anderson could respond, movement flickered at the forest edge, men in dark clothing emerging from cover, Sterling's private security contractors positioning to surround them. Trapped between the roadblock ahead and approaching forces behind their escape route had become a perfect ambush site. Becca reversed instinctively, creating distance between their vehicle and the blockade. "Put your seatbelts on," she ordered her children, calculation replacing fear. The Subaru's all-wheel drive had handled worse terrain during their approach. Perhaps they could forge an alternate path through the underbrush. Anderson recognized her intention, gesturing urgently toward a barely visible break in the trees to their right. There, Catherine marked a secondary trail on the map. It's narrower but connects to the same network. The security contractors advanced their purpose, unmistakable, not to engage directly, but to delay them until county deputies arrived with legal authority to seize the evidence. One raised a camera documenting their presence, manufacturing evidence of their trespassing for later legal proceedings. "Mom, they're coming up behind us too," Olivia reported, watching through the rear window. "4 more guys coming up the trail." The secondary path Anderson indicated barely qualified as a trail, more suggestion than reality, a slight thinning of undergrowth marking where loggers had once traversed decades earlier. Becca assessed the gap, then her children's faces weighing physical risk against the consequence of capture. "Hold on tight." She spun the wheel, gunning the engine, as the Subaru lurched off the main trail toward the narrow opening. Branches scraped along both sides of the vehicle, undercarriage groaning as it navigated uneven ground. Behind them, shouting erupted as Sterling's men realized their quarry was escaping. Anderson followed her lead, his more powerful SUV crashing through undergrowth as they forged a makeshift escape route. The vehicles bounced and jarred along the forgotten path, each successful meter increasing distance from their pursuers, who would need to return to vehicles and find alternative pursuit routes. That was awesome! Noah's excitement overrode his fear, adrenaline transforming the dangerous escape into adventure in his 12-year-old mind. "Not awesome," Becca corrected, though relief colored her tone. "Necessary and incredibly risky. Is everyone okay?" Affirmative responses from the back seat confirmed no injuries despite the rough transit. The path gradually widened as they continued, Catherine's faded blue blazes occasionally visible on passing trees, confirming they followed her mapped route. Anderson's voice crackled over the radio. "Sterling's people will notify the roadblocks. We need to reach the research station before they can reposition." The journey continued for another tense hour, each fork in the crude trail requiring careful navigation using Catherine's hand-drawn map. The forest thinned gradually as they climbed higher into the hills, eventually emerging onto a gravel fire road marked with national forest boundary signs. "We made it to federal land," Ruth announced over the radio, visible relief in her voice. "County deputies have no jurisdiction here." The research station appeared around the next bend, a cluster of rustic buildings surrounding a central laboratory structure, solar panels glinting on south-facing roofs. A silver-haired woman in hiking boots and cargo pants awaited their arrival, alerted by Anderson's earlier calls. Dr. Eliza Washington greeted Ruth with the embrace of old friends, long separated, then welcomed the others with efficient professionalism. "Let's get Catherine's evidence secured immediately. I've contacted Federal Environmental Enforcement. They're dispatching agents from the regional office." Inside the main laboratory, Dr. Washington supervised the transfer of samples and documentation to secure storage, her scientific precision matching Catherine's own methodical approach. As they worked, she shared her history with the missing botanist. "Catherine contacted me 3 days before she disappeared, wanted to discuss her findings privately. She never arrived for our meeting." Dr. Washington sealed a sample container, labeling it with practiced efficiency. "I reported her missing when she missed a second appointment. The local investigation was surprisingly brief and inconclusive." "Sterling's influence," Ruth explained, sorting through corporate documents. "The sheriff at the time owed his election to Sterling campaign contributions." "I always suspected foul play," Washington acknowledged. Catherine had discovered something significant. She mentioned breakthrough evidence in her final call. When she vanished and Sterling's company suddenly abandoned plans for a reservoir project on adjacent land, the connection seemed obvious. Becca recognized the pattern from corporate cover-ups she'd witnessed during her career's sudden project abandonment. When liability risks emerged, strategic retreats disguised as business decisions. They knew that contamination would eventually be discovered during required environmental assessment. Precisely. Washington nodded approval at Becca's insight. Instead, they pivoted to bottled water sourced from the uncontaminated aquifer beneath Catherine's property, marketing natural purity while actively polluting public water sources upstream. The evidence Catherine had meticulously gathered painted a damning picture of corporate malfeasance, spanning decades. Internal memos, acknowledging contamination risks, suppressed test results, strategically timed land acquisitions, tracking the path of the protected aquifer. Most disturbing were mortality statistics Catherine had compiled showing cancer clusters downstream from Sterling facilities, human consequences of corporate greed. This would have destroyed them if released 30 years ago, Anderson observed, reviewing the documentation. Now, with 3 decades of additional contamination, the liability is incalculable. Olivia, who had been carefully organizing Catherine's journals by date, suddenly called attention to an entry from the final volume. Listen to this. Catherine wrote this 3 days before she disappeared. Edward Sterling's son William visited today, requesting private meeting away from his father's knowledge. Unlike Edward, the young man seems genuinely disturbed by my water test results. He's provided internal documents confirming corporate knowledge of contamination dating to 1952 material that would destroy his family company if made public. His conscience appears genuine, though his motivations remain suspect. I've arranged to meet him at Riverside Site number 7 tomorrow to collect additional documentation he promises will provide irrefutable proof of deliberate endangerment. Silence followed Olivia's reading, implications crystallizing in every mind present. William Sterling, now the company's ruthless leader, had once approached Catherine as a whistleblower against his own father's environmental crimes. He met with her just before she vanished. Ruth whispered, horror dawning in her expression. Either to genuinely provide evidence or to lure her to a remote location, Anderson finished grimly. The question is whether he was complicit in what happened next, or witness to something that changed him from whistleblower to perpetuator. Before they could process this revelation, the research station's security system activated proximity alarms indicating vehicles approaching along the access road. Dr. Washington checked the surveillance monitors, tension returning to her posture. County sheriff vehicles, 3 of them. Sterling must have political connections at the federal level as well. Anderson moved to the window, assessing their position. They can't legally seize evidence without federal warrants, which they won't have obtained this quickly. Legal restrictions haven't stopped Sterling so far, Becca noted, gathering her children closer instinctively. This is different, Washington assured them, her confidence unwavering. This facility operates under Department of Energy security protocols due to our watershed radiation monitoring programs. Those deputies cannot enter without federal authorization regardless of what local judge signed their papers. The confidence proved warranted when the deputies remained at the access gate, prevented from entering by the research station's security protocols. Their radio communications, monitored through the station's systems, revealed confusion and frustration as they awaited instructions from increasingly desperate superiors. Sterling's reaching the end of his options, Anderson observed with grim satisfaction. Federal authorities will be here within hours. Once they take custody of Catherine's evidence, no amount of local influence will bury it again. The prediction proved accurate but incomplete. As federal environmental officials were en route, a sleek black SUV appeared at the research station gate, not law enforcement, but a private vehicle carrying William Sterling himself. He's requesting direct communication, Dr. Washington reported, monitoring the security feed. Says he's coming alone, unarmed, to clarify misunderstandings. Ruth's expression hardened. 30 years too late for clarification. We should hear what he has to say, Anderson countered pragmatically. His presence here, separated from his legal team and security forces, suggests desperation. Desperate opponents make concessions impossible to obtain otherwise. After security protocols verified, Sterling carried no weapons. Dr. Washington authorized his entry to an exterior conference room, neutral territory, where they could maintain both safety and leverage. Becca insisted on participating, despite Anderson's concerns, her corporate experience with negotiation potentially valuable. William Sterling had aged visibly since their confrontation at the cabin, stress etching new lines around his eyes and mouth. His tailored suit appeared rumpled, his usual polished demeanor fractured by exhaustion, and what appeared surprisingly like genuine remorse. You found Catherine's evidence. Not a question, but acknowledgement, his voice lacking the commanding tone from previous encounters. All of it, I presume, including the corporate documents I provided her 30 years ago. The admission stunned them into momentary silence. Sterling continued, gaze fixed on the conference table rather than meeting their eyes. I was 25, newly graduated from business school, just beginning to understand what my father had built and how he'd built it. The contamination data Catherine showed me. He paused, composing himself. I had to do something. Couldn't be complicit. So you turned whistleblower, Anderson supplied, skepticism evident. Yet weeks after Catherine's disappearance, you abandoned that position entirely, eventually becoming more aggressive than your father in pursuing her property and suppressing her research. Sterling's laugh held no humor, just hollow recognition. You've seen only the beginning of my interaction with Catherine, not how it ended. He finally looked up, eyes haunted by memories. I didn't just provide documents. I agreed to testify against my father, recorded conversations, admitting corporate knowledge of contamination. Catherine and I planned to approach federal prosecutors together. What happened? Becca asked, sensing the narrative's dark turn. My father discovered my meetings with her. He followed me to our final rendezvous at the river testing site. Sterling's voice dropped lower, decades-old horror resurfacing. I arrived early with the final documentation. Catherine was cataloging water samples when my father appeared with two men I'd never seen before, security contractors I later learned used for special problems. The conference room fell completely silent. Even breathing seemed suspended as Sterling continued. They attacked without warning. Catherine fought. She was remarkably strong for her size, but they overpowered her. I tried to intervene, but one of them struck me unconscious. When I woke, Catherine was gone. So was all evidence of her research and my documentation. You expect us to believe you were an innocent bystander? Ruth's voice trembled with 3 decades of suppressed grief and rage. That you've spent 30 years trying to bury Catherine's work because of trauma rather than complicity. Sterling's expression reflected complex emotion, guilt, defensiveness, and what appeared to be genuine shame. I expect nothing. I'm here because the truth deserves witness after 30 years of silence. He reached slowly into his jacket, withdrawing a small digital recorder, including my responsibility for what followed. The recording device sat between them like physical manifestation of long-buried truth. Sterling pressed play, his own younger voice emerging with startling clarity. She was helping people. The contamination is killing people downstream. How could you do this? The younger Sterling's voice cracked with emotion. An older voice responded with chilling calm. Business requires difficult decisions, William. Ms. Collins chose her path knowing the consequences of challenging Sterling Industries. The unfortunate accident at the river changes nothing about your responsibilities to this family and company. Accident. You had her killed. I saw everything. What you saw was corporate security addressing an environmental terrorist threatening our operations. Remember your position, son. Everything you have, your education, your future, this company itself comes with obligation to protect Sterling interests. Your recorded conversations with Collins are now company property. Your testimony would be disregarded as mentally unstable, a condition requiring extended institutional treatment. The threat hung in the recorded silence before the younger Sterling responded, defeat evident. What happens now? You assume operational oversight of our Northern Timber Division. Effective immediately, distance and responsibility will put perspective on today's regrettable events. In time, you'll understand that sacrifices are sometimes necessary for greater purpose. The recording ended, leaving heavy silence in its wake. Sterling present day. Sterling looked physically ill, as if the recording had manifested his illness of spirit into physical form. I made that recording the night Catherine disappeared. Insurance, I told myself, though. I lacked courage to use it. His voice emerged barely above a whisper. Within a week, my father fabricated evidence of Catherine's emotional instability and environmental extremism, undermining any credibility her research might have if discovered. I was transferred to Oregon operations for 5 years, returning only after proving my reliability to company interests. You became your father, Ruth observed, her tone softened slightly by this glimpse into Sterling's corruption. continuing his work because the alternative was too difficult to face. I became worse than my father. Sterling acknowledged no self-pity in his admission. He acted from simple greed. I acted from cowardice, knowing the harm continuing and hiding the truth. He gestured toward the recorder. This won't erase my culpability, but perhaps it offers what Catherine deserved, justice, however delayed. Anderson's legal mind processed implications with professional detachment. This recording confirms corporate conspiracy to conceal environmental crimes, adds homicide charges, and establishes 30 years of deliberate concealment that nullifies any statute of limitations concerns. My father died believing he'd secured the Sterling legacy. A bitter smile crossed William's face. I've ensured that legacy is criminal prosecution and financial ruin, fitting justice for us both. What about Catherine? Ruth demanded, grief overriding legal considerations. Where is she? Her family. I deserve proper burial, proper mourning. Sterling's expression reflected genuine regret. I don't know, truly. I was removed from any involvement after that night. Based on overheard conversations years later, I believe they transported her body to one of our remote timber operations for burial, but specific location. He spread his hands in helpless acknowledgement of this final cruelty. The federal environmental team arrived while Sterling provided formal statement to authorities, their specialized equipment and personnel transforming the research station into command center for what would clearly become major criminal environmental investigation. Sterling surrendered himself to federal custody, waiving rights to attorney presence during initial questioning, his final attempt at redemption through complete disclosure. As night fell over the mountain research station, Becca found her children gathered on the observation deck overlooking the forest Catherine had fought to protect. The ancient trees stood silent witness to human drama that had unfolded beneath their branches. Catherine's research, her disappearance, and now the long-delayed revelation of truth. Will they find her body? Sophia asked, her 8-year-old mind focused on the human element rather than environmental implications. I don't know, sweetie, Becca answered honestly. But they found her truth, which might be what mattered most to Catherine. Noah leaned against the railing, uncharacteristically contemplative. Sterling was a good person once, wasn't he? Before he got scared and made bad choices. The insight from her 12-year-old surprised Becca with its compassion and perception. I think most people start with good intentions. The hard part is maintaining them when they become difficult or costly. Like you did, Olivia added quietly, when you wouldn't sign off on those false compliance reports at your company, even though it cost your job. Becca hadn't realized Olivia knew about the ethical stand that had contributed to her termination. The comparison between her smaller moral choice and Sterling's massive failure of courage created uncomfortable resonance. Both situations involved speaking truth despite consequences, though with vastly different stakes. Anderson joined them on the deck, legal documents tucked under his arm. Federal prosecutors are already discussing immunity parameters for Sterling in exchange for complete cooperation. His testimony will dismantle the corporate shield that's protected Sterling Industries for decades. What happens to Catherine's land? Becca asked, thinking of the cabin that had sheltered them in crisis and revealed truth in equal measure. Ruth inherits as Catherine intended. She's already discussing conservation easements to permanently protect the aquifer and surrounding watershed. Anderson leaned against the railing beside them. Which brings me to this, an interesting proposition Ruth and I have been discussing. The documentation he presented outlined creation of educational foundation based around Catherine's research, a center for water conservation studies that would require dedicated staff for administration, community education, and ongoing research support. Ruth believes you'd be ideal as the foundation's executive director. Anderson continued. Your corporate management experience combined with your family's connection to Catherine's discovery makes you uniquely qualified. Becca stared at the proposal, mind racing with implications. I don't have environmental science background. Neither did Catherine initially. She learned because she cared. Anderson gestured toward the children. Your family has demonstrated the same commitment. The position includes housing the cabin renovated properly and educational partnerships with local schools that might interest Olivia particularly. The opportunity seemed impossibly perfect, addressing their housing crisis, Becca's employment needs, and creating purpose from their accidental involvement in Catherine's legacy. After corporate disillusionment, the foundation offered meaningful work, protecting resources that benefited communities rather than shareholders. Would we really live in the cabin? Noah's excitement bubbled through his attempted casual tone. Permanently. It needs significant renovation, Anderson cautioned. But yes, the foundation director position includes residents on site. We could plant Catherine's flowers from her specimens, Sophia suggested, already envisioning their future home. Make her garden grow again. Olivia remained pragmatic despite her evident interest. What about school? We can't exactly commute back to the city. Pine Haven has surprisingly strong educational programs due to university partnership programs, Anderson explained. Plus, the foundation includes internship opportunities for high school students interested in environmental science. Ruth mentioned your science fair achievements might make you an ideal candidate. The perfect solution arriving when they most needed direction seemed almost orchestrated, as if Catherine's planning extended beyond her documentation to providing for those who would eventually discover it. Becca considered her children's hopeful expressions, weighing corporate career aspirations against the purposeful work Catherine's foundation offered. I'd need to learn so much, she acknowledged both to Anderson and herself. Water conservation, environmental regulation, grant administration, all learnable skills, Anderson assured her. The foundation needs someone with integrity and management experience who cares about the mission. Technical knowledge can be acquired. Character cannot. The night deepened around them as Becca considered the unexpected fork in her life's path. 2 weeks ago, corporate restructuring had seemed like catastrophic ending. Now it appeared as necessary redirection toward more meaningful purpose, not just employment, but vocation, protecting resources for future generations. I think we should do it, Olivia stated with teenage directness. It matters, more than selling productivity software to corporations ever did. Noah nodded vigorous agreement. Plus, I can build actual tree forts instead of just drawing them. Catherine would like us living there, Sophia added with the certainty children sometimes possess about matters beyond logical explanation. She's been waiting for someone to finish her work. Their collective enthusiasm tipped Becca's hesitation toward acceptance. Perhaps her career expertise had always been preparing her for this unexpected application, managing resources that benefited many, rather than enriching few. I'd want to be sure Ruth truly wants this arrangement, not just offering charity to a family in need. Ruth Davis doesn't do charity, Anderson assured her with knowing smile. She spent 30 years protecting Catherine's legacy. She wouldn't entrust it to anyone she didn't believe could honor its purpose. 1 year later, the Catherine Collins Environmental Research Center welcomed its first student groups to the renovated property. The cabin expanded and modernized while maintaining its historic character, served as both administrative headquarters and home to the Wilson family. Surrounding acres had been placed under conservation easement, permanently protecting the aquifer Catherine had documented decades earlier. The Sterling Industries criminal case had progressed through federal courts, resulting in unprecedented financial penalties and remediation requirements. William Sterling, in exchange for full cooperation, received suspended sentence focused on community service, specifically using his business expertise to support environmental restoration projects throughout regions his family's company had contaminated. Ruth Davis had become the foundation's board chairperson, her business acumen providing stability as the organization established itself. At 77, she found renewed purpose, advancing Catherine's vision, her weathered hands now guiding new generation of environmental advocates. Michael Anderson provided ongoing legal counsel, his weekly visits becoming regular feature of foundation operations and increasingly personal highlight in Becca's schedule. Their professional relationship had gradually evolved into deeper connection, two people who valued integrity, finding unexpected common ground. The Wilson children had thrived in their new environment. Olivia earned a prestigious science fellowship for her expansion of Catherine's original research, documenting recovery patterns in previously contaminated watersheds. Noah led hiking programs for visiting school groups, his natural enthusiasm and growing knowledge of local ecology making him popular guide despite his youth. Sophia maintained Catherine's restored garden, developing intuitive understanding of plant needs that sometimes seemed almost supernatural in its accuracy. On the anniversary of their arrival at the cabin, Becca stood on the newly built observation deck overlooking the protected forest. Autumn painted the landscape in fiery oranges and deep reds, Catherine's beloved trees preparing for seasonal rest and renewal. Below, visitors explored interactive exhibits explaining watershed protection and water conservation principles. Catherine's research transformed into educational tools for future generations. Ruth joined her at the railing, moving more slowly now, but still sharp-minded and determined. Catherine would have approved, don't you think, all this from her scattered notes and hidden samples. She built the foundation. We just constructed the building. Becca smiled at the metaphor's literal and figurative truth. She understood that knowledge only matters when shared and applied. Knowledge and courage, Ruth corrected gently. She had information, but she also had willingness to stand against the power when necessary, as did you when it mattered. The comparison still felt unearned to Becca, but she accepted Ruth's assessment with grace. Their accidental discovery of Catherine's legacy had transformed not just their circumstances, but their understanding of responsibility to community and future generations. From the main building, Sophia emerged carrying an armful of late-blooming black-eyed Susans grown from Catherine's preserved seeds. Noah followed with clipboard documenting bloom times and growth patterns for ongoing research to database. Olivia walked beside Michael Anderson, deep in conversation about water quality testing methods for the spring education programs. Family looks different than we expect sometimes, Ruth observed, watching the group approach. Catherine found hers when she adopted me. You found yours when you discovered her cabin. Circles connecting across time. The observation captured something Becca had felt but never articulated, the sense that their presence here fulfilled pattern, greater than random chance completing work, begun by a woman they'd never met, but whose values they now lived daily. As the sun set behind Catherine's protected forest, Becca surveyed what they'd built together. Not just research center and educational programs, but community united by shared commitment to environmental stewardship. Their arrival at the abandoned cabin had seemed like desperate ending. Instead, it had been perfect beginning. Catherine Collins had disappeared physically, but her vision lived on through those who carried her work forward. Sometimes justice arrived decades later than deserved. Sometimes purpose emerged from seeming catastrophe. And sometimes Becca reflected as her family gathered around her on the observation deck, what looks like loss becomes the doorway to everything that matters most.